Today we have a very special guest, someone who actually exemplifies an adventure in law and has practiced beyond the bar, in my view, in many ways. So welcome, Sharon Sutherland.
Thanks.
Now, before I get to your credentials, I want to start with something different here.
Okay.
I want to start with your adventures before law.
Okay.
And you were a trampoline instructor at age 12.
I was.
Which reminded me that it would be great training for family law lawyers because they feel like that every day that they're on a trampoline. So you were a trampoline instructor at age 12. Now, you were a library page. What is a library page?
One of the people who assists in the library.
Okay.
Yeah.
But more importantly, you were on a highways crew.
I was. I'm not sure why that's more important.
What was the favorite part of being on a highway crew?
Well, I was mostly in the office, so I was mostly actually doing calculations for how much gravel needed to go in various different places. So mostly doing a whole lot of math, and I actually thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun.
So you were a quantifier in some ways.
I was.
Okay.
Yeah, Alex Fraser Bridge.
Okay.
There are potholes still that I was involved in figuring out the actual volumes of gravel that went around them.
Because you undercalculated, is that right?
No. I managed.
Okay. On a more serious note, from 2000 to 2014, you were a full-time professor in the Faculty of Law at UBC. From 1993 to 2003, you were a project manager of the Court Mediation Program. You were a founding board member of Core Conflict Resolution Society, executive director of Mediate BC. You have a number of master's degrees. You were past president of the Fringe Festival. And in 2011, and I hope I pronounce this properly, you won the Susanne Johnny Prize for Excellence in Mediation.
Susanne Yanni.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in 2021, you received an honorary doctorate from the Justice Institute of BC.
That's right.
Now, when I was reading about that, and that was in the area of conflict resolution.
Yes, specifically.
When I was reading about that, you wrote, as a direct result of the pandemic, we have engaged in heightened discourse on equity and inclusion. And I wasn't particularly clear of the connection between the pandemic and discourse on equity and inclusion. So may I ask you what the connection is?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's several different kinds of connection.
Yeah.
I mean, some of it was simply we started to talk about how do people access different spaces, how do people engage together. Once you are no longer meeting in person, what does that mean and how many times do we start talking about what was inclusive to begin with? Was it always inclusive to require people to come to court? Was it inclusive to have meetings in other kinds of spaces? Was it not? But I think it went way beyond that as we started to look at different tools. What kind of accessibility do you have? We make presumptions around people being able to participate in a lot of different ways. We ignore different generations having different kinds of access and comfort and familiarity. We ignore rural versus urban areas and the ways in which different kinds of technology are engaged. But we also got into much more of a conversation around a lot of other kinds of things that come to bear in our assumptions we make about what it's like to be in a room face-to-face, having those conversations. Who benefits in those situations? Who is privileged by the assumptions we make around being in those spaces? And the fact that it also was a time at which all of the different activities in the States around Black Lives Matter and the discussions around race and engagement with race came up and circled around much of the same kinds of period. And we started to look at, I think very much, what spaces are equitable and safe for different people for a variety of different reasons, and what kind of privileges are there. And one of the ones that I'm kind of interested in personally is I'm really interested in the ways that we can actually engage in spaces that aren't just get on Zoom and try and translate what we do in person into a Zoom space and say, it's all the same, but rather to question, is it? Is it actually safe? Does it create those kinds of benefits? Or should we really be exploring other kinds of things like avatars? Should we be engaging in other kinds of ways? So I'm really curious about the ways that the disruption of the pandemic has changed our discourse on how we engage and who is privileged by the ways in which we assume we engage.
Okay.
Yeah.
On your website, True North,
Yep.
it reads that your theatrical background, obviously theatrical, I can
Okay.
tell from your answer to the last question, that in all seriousness, that your theatrical background informs your teaching and practice.
For sure.
And I wanted to ask you how theater comes into play in your mediations.
Oh, there's so many answers to that, Jeff, and I'm not sure where you want me to go with it, but
Give me the best answer.
that's the best answer is a really long answer, so I don't want to go there. But in terms of theater, there's a ton of different ways in which training in theater actually applies to the role of a mediator and can support you as a mediator in the way you work. When we train for improv, for instance, the kinds of things we're training for are spontaneity, trust building, what is called accepting offers, and is really about listening to what somebody is saying and building on it. So the yes and, the I hear what you're saying, let me acknowledge what you're saying, let me build on it, rather than let me listen to rebut, which is frankly what many lawyers do and is largely what we're trained to do in law school, is you listen to find out what's wrong with it so that you can jump on what's wrong with it, because somehow that's meant to be more persuasive than listening and saying, Jeff, you said this, I agree with that part of it, and here's this bit. So so both as a training option for a mediator, but also literally to engage in that conversation in the mediation room.
Can you give me a practical example
Sure.
of theater working in a mediation?
Absolutely. I have used Yes and, the really, really simple game Yes and, as a way to have parties who are just butting heads endlessly stop, talk, and engage differently. Like, let's just play a simple game of yes and. You can say yes, but let's build, let's build, let's build. And people get so frustrated and immediately start laughing when they yes, but each other. Now let's try a yes and on a topic that has nothing whatsoever to do with the matter in dispute, but on something else. Let's plan a party. Yes, and let's do this. It gives you a chance to engage in a conversation about what the difference is in listening, waiting, and trying to build on rather than shoot down every idea. And I've had lots of success using that in just as a tool where we stop and we just play, and then we go back into the mediation and start watching for it.
Well, I would think you'd have a lot of reticence from the lawyers when you ask them to engage in a yes and game. Is that right?
No, that's exactly wrong.
Okay.
And I would say lawyers are the most ready to get in. You've got to you choose your time, right? Like, it's not as people are at their most elevated and angry and things are really, really stuck that you go, oh, hey, could we play a game instead? Because that would change things. That would be a great way to go. You don't do that. You say, okay, so let's take a break. We're having some challenges. Let's talk to the lawyers about what we might do. But I have found that lawyers tend to be in a place where they actually can see the value of it, of something that changes dynamic. And sure, let's try it. And if they're a little reticent, they aren't the second time you do it.
I would have been a lot reticent. Okay, that's interesting. Can you give me one more example of a game that you would ask either lawyers or parties to play in a mediation that would enhance the mediation?
I do some drawing, so I'm going to think of that as something that it is not uncommon, and this will depend on who the parties are again, right? But I've absolutely had people both do physically form, especially with children, form an image of what they would ideally like to see. So physically taking the shape of or showing with their body how they're feeling and what their hopes are, but also drawing the same kinds of things and using that as a tool, it can be really, really opening for people to be able to do that. And you do get a lot of reticence. You get people saying, I'm not an artist. But you don't need to be an artist to be collaboratively drawing something that is just something that's a conversation piece.
What would you draw?
I usually don't.
Somebody going to the bank and taking out their $1 million settlement?
No, not at all.
What would you draw?
You know what you usually get? You usually get something that is oriented around how people are going to get along.
Okay.
And that's often something that it may not be the solution, but it's the way you can get to the solution.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you know, after I spoke to you on Zoom
Yes.
for us to introduce ourselves, I thought there is no better person in the profession to ask my next question to.
Uh-oh, okay.
Because you, more than anybody, enjoy practicing law. Mm-hmm. So there's so many young lawyers, as you know, Sharon, that don't enjoy practicing law in the traditional manner.
Yeah.
If one of them came to you, what would you say to raise them from their professional rut and to pursue other ideas about practicing law?
Yeah, this is something that I do have these conversations a lot.
I know you do.
And a lot of the conversations are really focused on helping somebody think through what are the things they do enjoy. Because I genuinely believe that there are so many different ways you can engage in law, so many different things that you can be doing, and that if you are figuring out what your passion and interest is, what are the things you actually like, that can be subject area. It might be, I want to be working in the sports area. I want to be working with my community. Or it can be the kind of practice you have. I want to be helping people. I want to be in the courtroom. I want to be, whatever those kinds of things are, you need to really dig down and find out what they are and then start from that. How do you build something around that passion? And I often just ask lots of questions about, what do you actually like doing that has nothing to do with law? And let's start from there.
But what about having something to do with law?
You get there. Yet, if you start with what do you actually like, why? The question of why do you like it? What are the things about it that you like? Is it the people you're working with? Is it the ways in which you do it? What are those things? Let's extrapolate and let's build what law would look like with the same qualities.
Do you think our profession is flexible enough to accommodate what you're talking about right now?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I think that people need to be quite brave sometimes, depending on what it is that they want to do with that. And there may be a number of different steps to build towards it. But I have found legal practice to be incredibly flexible, and that there are opportunities to do many, many different things. Yeah.
Okay. Before I forget, if anybody has questions, please put them on your Q&A, and we will attend to them at the end of the interview. I'd be glad to do that. Yeah. Sharon, last week I interviewed, and I don't know how many of you watched 2 weeks ago the show, two marvelous and successful lawyers who've been able to juggle family and work. Mm-hmm. And I want to ask firstly how you've managed this and what you would say to a young lawyer who came to you and said, look, most days I feel like a lousy parent, a lousy lawyer, and a lousy spouse or a lousy partner. I'm just having such a difficult time keeping up with that, the physical stuff I like, the cultural stuff I like. What's your secret? Do you have a secret for this? If they asked you, if they said to you, Sharon, do you have a secret for this? What would you say?
I don't have a secret. I think everybody's answer is going to be a little bit different. What is the balance that works for them? I've been really, really fortunate. I have been in a position where I've been able to have a lot of help. We moved from Toronto when our children were really young, specifically because I had family. So my parents were in Tsawwassen, my sister was in Tsawwassen, my brother was in Tsawwassen. We moved to Tsawwassen, and we had a lot of family around us. So we've had support in ways that not everybody does, and that isn't an answer you can say.
No, but it's a foundation.
But it's a foundation.
And it's an important foundation.
It's critical, and it's really a big
critical.
reason why we've been in the place where we knew we had backup people when things weren't going the way that they needed to. So we could schedule ourselves in a way that, maybe we weren't both available.
I notice you use the word we, and I take it you're talking about your spouse.
I am.
And so is that critical in enjoying or being successful in practicing law?
I don't know. It has worked really, really well for me. It is. I have a partner that I have a huge amount of fun with,
Yes.
who supports me in doing really weird things sometimes,
Yes.
and making different choices. So absolutely, that's it's a foundational part of my family, and
Okay.
it supports the way that I approach things.
So we've talked about a foundation in the community, foundation with your partner. What other foundations are there that a young lawyer would need to really have the basis for enjoying what they're doing?
I mean, one of the things that I've had, I have tried to find other kinds of community and other ways to engage and have support and fun that is adjacent to law. So different kinds of friend groups that can support me and talk through different kinds of things. People doing the same kind of practice. I've set up a lot of different practice groups, and I've been a member of a lot of different practice groups that are both social and opportunities to get together and talk through issues. And I've found that engaging in those kinds of networking things are not about trying to build practice. I think of networking as building a network of support and people that I can reach out to and engage with and have those conversations with.
And that would be a community of colleagues.
Absolutely, a community of colleagues.
And that's essential.
For me, it is. Yeah.
Okay.
I think we're all different, and we all have different kinds of needs.
Yeah, I don't know how different everybody is with that, because I know I get a lot of phone calls from young lawyers who are very isolated
Yeah.
and just need a community of colleagues
Yeah.
to speak to.
For sure.
So I'm assuming there's a lot of people who don't have a community of colleagues.
Yeah.
Do you know how one would go about doing that?
Well, I know how you would do it in mediation. I would say, I'm going to just say this to the camera, go ahead and send me an email, because I'm happy to chat with folks who are interested in getting into mediation, interested in making those connections, interested in finding those communities. Part of what I do now at Mediate BC is actually try to help people set up different communities of practice and ways in which they might engage, or ways in which they might find somebody who is working in the same area and is happy to talk to them in a variety of different kinds of mentorship roles, from as simple as I'll take a call and chat a little bit about what my practice looks like, through I'll co-mediate with you. There's a huge range of different things, and each one of them is valuable in its own way. So I'm all about helping people find those communities.
Okay.
Yeah.
In a recent International Bar Association Young Lawyers report, 62%, an alarming number, of young lawyers cited poor work-life balance as their main concern practicing law. Do you have any words of wisdom about how to maintain work-life balance?
I don't think I think anybody who knows me would just laugh at me if I tried to say
I'm
anything
not
about
laughing.
that. No, you don't know me well enough to laugh. That's the problem.
I know you have work-life balance.
I do.
I do know.
I do, but I really revel in change and new. Anything that is new and exciting and an opportunity. So for me, when I'm actually getting buried, I take on a new project, which is completely the wrong answer for virtually everybody, which is why I think most people would just laugh at me trying to give advice around work-life balance. I need excitement.
I think you know more than that, because I know you have a huge cultural aspect of your life. I know you have a huge community part of your life, friends. I know you have a huge community of lawyers that you talk to. So is there anything specific you can say? What if a young lawyer just phoned you and said, look, this is just too much for me. I need more balance in my life. Where would you tell them to start?
I would tell them to start by thinking about what isn't working and figuring out how they can stop doing that thing that isn't working. Because it's often one piece that you can step back from. As I say, my answer is often to find something new and shift. And I have, you were reading out a lot of my background. I have shifted frequently. When things have reached a point where they're not fun, I have tended to look around for what the next thing is that will be fun, that will build on the skills that I have, will build on the community that I've built, will build on everything else, but will allow me to shift in a way that keeps it fun.
You know, all through the years, people used to say, you should have fun practicing law. And I never thought that there was anything fun in practicing law. I mean, it was serious, a lot of work. I mean, your colleagues were fun, but you seem to say that there is fun in practicing law. So can you tell us a little bit about that? How to make it fun?
Well, I don't want to pretend that there are parts of law that are never going to be fun, because you're engaged with people who are going through a difficult time. And you are going to feel for them, you're going to have empathy, you're going to be engaged in some hard work in a lot of those. But there are ways in which you can find things that do energize you. And that's really what I'm talking about. Things that give you some satisfaction in being able to, it might be in helping somebody through that particularly difficult time, but finding the ways that it supports you and makes you feel better. But there are genuinely, I mean, you were kind of laughing at the idea that I'd done some collaborative game development.
Well, we're going to get to that.
I know, but I'm saying, like,
we're going to have some. We're going to have some fun.
But that's a chance to have fun, is right.
We're going to have fun.
When you look at things that are problems in a mediation, people are struggling and they have a really, really competitive approach and can't break out of this cultural norm around competition. A way to have fun is to say, what would you do to change that? Well, let's have a game jam. Let's create a way to resolve that problem.
Okay, and that's what I wanted to talk to you next, is that very special and different way of practicing in the mediation field. You know, you've gone well beyond the conservative norms of the bar in combining creativity with learning and creativity with practicing. And I know you're a huge advocate of collaborative games and drama. So is there some nexus between games and law and drama?
I mean, yes. So where I started with collaborative games is actually sitting in a mediation room. I was doing a lot of small claims mediations at this time because I was mentoring the law students at UBC going through a program. And I recall having come straight from an event where I was coaching field hockey. And I had been having a ridiculously difficult conversation with a bunch of parents who were just all about, you know, my kid needs to be the one scoring the goal. And convinced that somehow competition was this great thing, everybody needs to learn to compete, but somehow couldn't get it around in their heads that team play still has to be about celebrating the assists as well as the goals and all of the rest of that. So it had been that kind of conversation. And so sitting in this small claims mediation, I was just hearing the same kind of dynamic with the parties. The kind of just pushing back competition has to be all about who comes out on top, as opposed to, is there some collaborative way to get to a resolution that's actually better for everybody? Much like we say team play is in sports. And so I was really thinking about, you know, what does this look like? Why do we learn this way to compete? And I just had this flash because my kids were of an age where we were starting to play lots of board games. And I was thinking, yeah, it's the same thing with all of the board games too. Everything we do teaches us that competition is somehow just inherently good and something we should be engaged in, rather than something we should actually break down and see what are the parts that are good, what do you actually take something positive out of. And so it got kind of exciting to me to think about, let's talk to people earlier, let's engage in other ways, let's actually spend some time breaking down how we compete and whether it's effective. Are we actually achieving our goals as well as we could? Or could we do something else? Yeah.
You designed a course in negotiation called Negotiation Skills for the Zombie Apocalypse. Is that right?
I did it with two colleagues,
Okay.
so I would name Emily Martin and Carrie Gallant before saying I did it, but yeah.
You may want to wait for the question to see whether you want to name other people.
Okay.
Now, can you tell me what that is? Because I was just totally confused about a zombie apocalypse in negotiation. So can you tell us what that is?
Well, the intention was to look at those really, really difficult kinds of negotiators who really just get stuck on a path, much the way zombies do. Like, I'm focused on brains. I'm focused on one thing. I can't transition. We got a little bit flexible because we spent the whole day on it. We happened to offer that course on Halloween. So we looked at the history of zombies and looked at a number of different kinds of zombie negotiators that are challenging negotiators, and how do you engage with them. Yeah.
I see. Okay. So in a mediation, if you find that a zombie negotiator is an impediment to making a deal, what do you do?
Well, that was an entire full-day course, Jeff, so I'm not going to give you the whole answer here, but there's tons of different things you can do to transition, and that is what mediators do all the time, is try to find the ways to help that person shift gears, or at least shift the dynamic in the room, so that we can talk about something different than that one thing in that one way that seems to really bog things down.
Would you speak to the mediator alone?
Sorry,
would you speak to the lawyer alone?
Sometimes.
Okay.
Sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah. It really depends on if it's, is it the lawyer that is creating the issue? Because sometimes the zombie negotiator is the lawyer. Sometimes the zombie negotiator is the client. They can come from different places.
More than anybody, I know what all of my colleagues who are mediators say to difficult lawyers when they're impeding a mediation.
What
and
do
it
they
happens
say?
all the time. But I wanted to know how you handled it.
I handle it differently depending on who it is.
Okay.
And what the impact is.
Okay.
But I certainly will pull people out and say, what's going on and why? Why are we in this stuck place? What's happening here? Because there could be things I don't know.
Okay. Something else that you developed, Random Acts Annual Melee of Kindness, AMOC.
I did not develop AMOC. They always say it AMOC. They've changed the name. Random Acts is a charity that's based in the States. I've participated in AMOC. But Random Acts is a charity that is focused on making the world a better place, one random act of kindness at a time. So actually supports, and I'll say this, folks, if anybody wants to carry out an act of kindness, you can be supported for up to $500 US to do some nice act of kindness. It's a great organization. So I've been involved in it, but I didn't set it up.
Okay, so that's something set apart from the practice of law.
Yeah, I would think so.
Okay, but speed dating isn't.
Well,
that was another very interesting thing for me when I read.
Speed dating or speed geeking?
Speed dating.
Okay.
I read about speed dating somewhere when I was reading about you.
Okay.
And it was for new mediators to connect with senior mediators.
Oh,
Is that right?
Yes.
All right, so tell me how that works.
It is very much like speed dating, but it's set up with mentors in one room, and we're talking Zoom rooms here, we did it online, though you can definitely do it in person, and hopefully we'll do an in-person one. You gather a bunch of people who are willing to talk as mentors, and you bring in an equal number of people who are interested in learning, and you do the rotation much like you would do in a speed dating thing. 5 minutes, let's chat.
And what's the chat about?
It'll be different depending on who they talk to. If they're interested in the same area of practice, they'll often talk about, what do I need to know about this area of practice? What would be helpful? What could I do? It might be that they're not in the same area of practice. So then they end up in quite a different conversation often about what kinds of things did you do to get into this practice? How did you find co-mediators? How did you do these things? So that opportunity. It's pretty common that people will walk out with a few business cards and an opportunity to call people that they connected with.
And so the purpose of that is connection?
Connection, opportunity, learning. You might get connections, but even if you don't, you get a chance to learn something about who else is in the practice and what are they doing.
Okay. And you're a big supporter of co-mentoring.
I am.
Okay. What the hard question I was going to ask was, what benefit is it to parties in the mediation to have a senior mediator, an experienced mediator, and then a very new mediator as a co-mediator? Is there any benefit to the parties in that?
Tons,
Okay.
and it varies all over the map as
Okay.
to what it might be. I will say a very simple one is during COVID, many senior people liked to co-mediate with somebody who had better tech skills and was more able to manage and function as they were moving into technology. Very simple one. It is really common for me to try to engage with somebody to co-mediate with who has a different background than me. In some way might bring something different to the mediation. I'm thinking that, in a schools mediation, I might invite somebody who has a background in schools and is engaging in mediation, right?
see.
So that they're bringing something. There might be reasons why you want a gender match that actually creates a different level of confidence in the room, where there's different kinds of issues going on that are tied to some kind of gendered issue. Similarly, you might bring in someone with a more similar background to one or another of the parties, or more knowledge but less skill in mediation.
So it can be a non-lawyer.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
How does that work from a legal perspective and a privilege perspective, having non-lawyers involved in mediation?
They're the mediators, so that we all are signing, from the beginning that they come in the room, they're
Yes.
part of the agreement to mediate. So there is a confidentiality agreement.
Okay.
So there isn't privilege in the same way there would be
Yeah.
as a solicitor client.
Yeah.
It's mediator confidentiality captured in the agreement.
Okay. That's very different than what I thought in my very old-fashioned mind was
Okay.
co-mediation, was having a young mediator in there to teach them how to mediate. But
You're doing that too. Yeah, so you can bring in somebody with less experience, and certainly I would spend time beforehand working through how are we going to work together, which is a coaching piece too, right? Here's
Yes.
the things that I would do.
Yeah.
They'll watch me do things, so there might be some demonstration things. Somebody might say, I'd really like to see how you do this transition piece, because I'm struggling with that. So I'll take that piece on and I'll demonstrate it. But I'll also hand it off for things that they particularly want to work in, and I'll be a safety net for them if they're struggling. I will definitely jump back in if they're kind of stuck or going down a path that maybe isn't working so well, and we'll debrief afterwards. And often in between, a lot of mediations that I do will have pre-mediations, so we'll have a chance to meet parties, but then have a chance to talk again, and a chance after. So you get several different chances to debrief, and it's a great learning. But I want to just really emphasize, Jeff, it's great learning for me too. I have never been in a co-mediation where I didn't take something out of it, even if it was learning about some bias that I have in some way that I am just doing something really in a rote way because I've been doing it so many times and didn't question it as somebody went a different way. So I get better by co-mediating.
I talked about the International Bar Association report, and reading through it again in preparing for this, I read another alarming number, that almost a third of young lawyers cite lack of mentorship as a barrier to progressing in their career. How do we solve that, Sharon?
I had a really interesting conversation with a couple leaders in the family bar not that long ago around how do we do that exactly? Because I think it's a really difficult thing. I think taking on responsibility individually for doing some mentorship is key, but it only gets you so far. It's about finding more systemic ways to ensure that people are being supported. And I think that's really, really hard. But part of it is having the conversation about what do we need to do to change systems. Because if somebody who is a junior needs to find somebody to mentor them and has to be the one initiating everything, has to go and ask, has to make cold calls and say, can I do this with you? Can you take me to this? You're not going to get there. You're going to have a third of people who simply can't do that. And there's nothing wrong with them because they can't do that. It's really, really difficult, and there's tons of reasons why it's easier for some people than others in terms of making those connections. And most of those are the kinds of things that replicate systems of privilege that we really do want to address really directly in our legal profession in any event. So I think that a really important conversation to keep having is the systems piece, and to try and each of us take responsibility and recognize that whenever we can create those spaces, whenever we can build, we should be doing that.
So it's a systemic problem for the most part. I know
I
this
think it
the
is.
question of mentorship has been raised in the last 10 years all the time
Yeah.
for the lack of it.
Yeah.
And nobody's really come up with an answer to it professionally, particularly now that law firms are working a lot on business models,
Absolutely.
if I can use that phrase. I think it's even become more difficult.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not working at a law firm right now. So my reflection on the ways it's working in law firms is really, I'm drawing a lot from folks I'm talking
Yes.
to who are my colleagues and friends, so people who are my vintage and are the ones who are sitting in mentorship roles. And certainly what I'm hearing is a shift in that dialogue. Each of them is talking about the ways in which they are doing quite different things than what I've seen in the past. I don't think they're there, but I'm hearing about a lot of change and firms making some really conscious decisions to have mentors across a variety of different practice areas, so not that one person you're responsible to. Mentors who are part of dealing with mental health issues and engaged in that, not just here's what you do and to get your work. And broadening the idea of what mentorship looks like within firms. I know it's happening. It needs to happen a lot more.
Right.
Yeah.
Now fun.
Okay,
You ready for
fun.
some fun?
Sure, we can try fun.
All right. Let's see if you know where I'm going.
I have no idea where you're going.
You might. In a CLE piece about you,
Okay.
you were asked the most valuable advice you had received in life. And you said we only need to follow 3 things.
3 rules.
You know where I'm going?
Sure, my parenting rules.
Don't be stupid. Don't be a 4-letter word starting with D and ending in K and slang for a particular organ. And don't sleep with mean people.
Yep, that's all you need.
Is that life or law?
That's everything. That's life. That's life.
And how on earth did you, and I actually had written down, how on earth, Sharon Sutherland, did you come up with these 3 things?
You know what? I'll tell you where they came from. We had friends who were asking my daughters what the rules were in our household. And the 3 of them sat there and they rattled off these rules. And I was like, what do you mean those are the rules? But those are the rules. They convinced me that those were the only rules I ever had in the house. That when they were really little, we had the don't be stupid rule, which we used to call the safety rule. I used safety, but that was all about not injuring yourself. When they got a little older and they had to socialize, they had and I'm going to say the word, Jeff, don't be a dick rule, which is the Will Wheaton rule. And because you had to learn how to be nice to people.
I think we were allowed to use the D word, but we decided before we weren't allowed to use the A word, right? Isn't that what we talked about?
I believe that we could use the A word twice.
Now, lastly, don't sleep with mean people. When did that come up in your family?
As they were hitting those preteen years, then the whole thing is around how do you combine safety and don't be a dick?
Okay.
And you combine them by don't sleep with mean people, which, by the way, is a reference to a Bubba Brinkman song. So
Okay.
yeah.
Well, that's way beyond my culture. Okay. I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions.
Okay.
And then we'll have some questions from the audience if we have any. If you could do anything in your career differently, what would it have been?
Nothing.
Okay. You're one of the only ones, you know, that would say that.
Well,
Or,
I
be
like what
honest.
I've done.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for me, reading about your career, I think anybody would have liked to have been you doing what you do because it sounds like fun.
It has been fun.
Not only fun, but also you've created amazing communities of lawyers. What's next on your bucket list to travel to?
Ooh. We won a trip to Laos back in 2019 that I haven't been able to take. So
Okay.
I want to take that trip.
All right. If you and I were going out for dessert afterwards, what would you order?
Gelato today. I'm feeling hot under the lights.
Oh, yeah? Okay. And your favorite cocktail?
Negroni with
Ah.
juniper ice cream
Okay. And what's the most bad snack that you eat?
that I eat. If it's a bad snack, I don't eat it.
What do you do?
I don't eat bad snacks. I only eat yummy things. What do you? Why is that a question?
Maybe it's got
Do you mean like an unhealthy snack?
unhealthy, yeah.
I don't know. chocolate bars, I guess.
Come
I don't know.
on, you're perfect in every other way. Give us something bad.
I do many, many bad things, but it isn't in the snack.
Now, there's a lot of causes you've been involved in, but if you were to
Okay.
devote the rest of your life to one cause, what would it be?
It will be whatever I'm doing at the moment and whatever is the most
Oh,
exciting
no,
at the
another
moment.
change.
That-
Sharon Sutherland,
this
you are
is-
like a change artist,
But
okay?
it's true. I've just been talking to you all about building community, so right now that's what's in my head, so that's where I'm going, but you know what? It'll change.
Okay. Do you ever get stressed out?
Very rarely.
Rarely.
Yeah.
Why?
Because
What's the secret?
I have no idea. I've been asked, but I just don't typically feel a lot of stress.
Is it part of your constitution?
Yes.
Okay. And when you do get stressed out, what do you do? Or do you remember it? Because it doesn't happen very often.
I just try and find something fun and let go. That's really what I do. I change. I go to something new.
Well,
Yeah.
you're an amazing person, an amazing lawyer,
Okay.
and you have a lot. There's a lot that lawyers can learn from you, and I wish every lawyer could be able to say, "I wouldn't change anything in my career," and I wish every lawyer would be able to say, "I don't get stressed out," and I wish every lawyer to say, "I had a great mentor." And I wish every lawyer to say, I have all these tools in my bag that I can pull out when I'm in a tough situation to change the environment.
Yeah.
And those are amazing attributes. And I thank you for passing them along to us. I was wholly engaged while preparing for today. A lot of stuff, Sharon, I didn't understand. A lot of stuff I didn't have any idea how it related to the practice of law in my conservative mind.
Yes. Everything connects.
But thank you. Now, do we have any questions? There's no questions? I guess you covered it all.
Or you did. You
I
asked
probably
all
didn't.
the right questions,
Okay.
clearly.
Well, thank you, everybody, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. And hopefully you enjoyed the show today, had a good laugh, and learned some new four-letter words. Thank you very much.